My brother-in-law once begged me for money, swearing it was to save his brother's life. I believed him split thousands from my own paycheck every month, only to find out later he was using it to betray my sister with another woman. My name's Michael. I'm 34, and this is the story of how I made him pay the price for every lie. I still remember that Friday evening as clearly as if it happened yesterday. My phone buzzed on the counter just as I was rinsing off a mug from work, and when I picked it up, I saw Emily's name. Her voice trembled on the other end, a mix of anger and something deeper that I immediately recognized as hurt. She tried to keep it together, but I could hear the way her breath kept catching as she spoke. "Michael, he's furious with me. All I did was buy a shirt, just one. It was $40. She broke down crying before she could finish her sentence. I leaned against the counter, gripping the phone tighter. My little sister was the kind of person who would rather wear the same pair of shoes until the soles wore thin than spend money on herself. If she had bought a shirt, there had to be a reason. "Emily, calm down. Tell me what happened," I said, trying to steady her with my voice. She sniffled. "We had a parent-teacher night at school. I wanted to look presentable, professional, you know. I saw a blouse on sale, just $40. I used some of the money I'd saved from tutoring after school. When Daniel saw it, he completely lost it. He accused me of wasting money we don't have, even suggested I bought it to impress someone else." The words hung in the air. My jaw clenched. Daniel, her husband of 8 years, was not only berating her for spending a small amount of her own money, but hinting at infidelity. That was not just unfair, it was cruel. I tried to keep my own voice calm. "Emily, it's a shirt. He knows you've been working extra hours tutoring. He knows you're careful with money." She let out a bitter laugh. "He doesn't care, Michael. He just kept going on and on. He called me irresponsible, said I'm selfish for thinking of myself when Mark is struggling. I told him it was my tutoring money, not from our household account. But he wouldn't listen." My stomach tightened. I could almost see the scene unfolding in their house across town. The yellow kitchen light glaring down as Emily stood there defending herself against accusations that cut deeper than she could show. I asked her, "Where is Sophie during all this?" She hesitated, and then I heard the quietest sob. "She was right there, Michael. She heard everything. She started crying, and Daniel told her to go to her room. She looked at me like she didn't understand what was happening." I shut my eyes for a moment, trying to swallow the anger rising in my chest. My niece was only 8, too young to be caught in the crossfire of adult arguments, too young to see her mother accused like that. Emily whispered, "I feel like I can't breathe in this house anymore. I'm walking on eggshells. I do everything I can. I cut every corner, and he still finds something to tear me down for." Her words carved into me. I thought about the way Daniel had come to me months earlier, his face pale with worry, begging for help to cover Mark's debt. I had agreed because I wanted to protect Emily, to ease her burden. And now she was calling me in tears over a $40 shirt. I said, "Emily, listen to me. You did nothing wrong. You have every right to buy yourself something, especially when it's with money you earned. Do not let him convince you otherwise." Her breathing slowed a little, though I could tell she was still wiping tears. "Thank you, Michael. I just needed someone to remind me I'm not crazy." I wanted to drive over right then, to stand in that kitchen and tell Daniel to his face that he had crossed a line. But Emily asked me not to. "Not tonight," she said softly. "Sophie is already upset. I'll put her to bed and try to calm down." After we hung up, I set the phone on the counter and stared at the mug still in the sink. I thought about Emily standing in front of her class every morning, smiling, teaching other people's children with patience and warmth. While at home, she was made to feel like she wasn't enough. I walked into my living room, the quiet pressing in around me. I remembered the way Daniel had looked me in the eye when he asked for help, how he swore this was temporary, that Mark just needed a few months to get back on his feet. $2,500 every month split between him and me, all to protect family. I had believed him. Now here was Emily crying over a $40 blouse, accused of betrayal for wanting to look like the professional she was. Something inside me shifted that night. It was as if the ground beneath what I thought was stable began to crack. I sat down heavily on the couch and stared at the dark television screen. I told myself it was only a shirt, only one fight, but the knot in my chest told me otherwise. I knew my sister. I knew when her voice carried exhaustion, when it carried shame that wasn't hers to carry. That evening, as the quiet of my house closed in, I realized this wasn't just about money or a shirt or even one argument. This was the beginning of something unraveling, something I would not be able to ignore. It was late spring when Daniel first came to my house. I remember the sky still holding on to the last bit of daylight, a faint orange glow spilling through the windows as he stood awkwardly in my doorway. His shoulders were slumped, his tie loosened, his eyes darting like he was trying to find the right words. I knew him well enough to notice when something was off, but I invited him in anyway. He sat at my kitchen table, tapping his fingers against the wood while I poured 2 cups of coffee. He didn't touch his, just stared at the steam as if it carried the answer to his problems. Finally, he looked up, his face heavy with an expression I had rarely seen on him. "Michael, I wouldn't be here if it weren't serious. I need your help." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, waiting for him to go on. "It's Mark. He's gotten himself into trouble." His words made me pause. I hadn't seen much of Mark in the past few years. He was younger, running a small garage on the west side of Cincinnati. He had always been reckless with money, but I didn't know it had gotten this bad. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "He co-signed a loan for Paul. You remember Paul, his old buddy from high school? Paul disappeared, left him holding the bag. The creditors are after him. They're threatening to take the shop, everything. If he loses that, I don't know how he'll ever get back on his feet." I frowned, thinking about Mark, about the garage he had worked hard to keep running. I had heard stories of small businesses folding in months after a single misstep. Daniel lowered his voice. "I've already promised to help, but it's too much for me alone. He needs $2,500 a month to keep the collectors off his back. I can cover half. I was hoping you could help with the other half." I stared at him, trying to process what he was asking. $2,500 was not pocket change. It was a significant cut from my salary money that could have gone into savings, into my mortgage, into my own life. My first instinct was to say no. But then I thought of Emily, of Sophie, of the way they relied on Daniel. If Mark collapsed under debt, if the family fractured, it would ripple through all of them. I rubbed my jaw, weighing the silence between us. Daniel leaned forward, desperation clear in his eyes. "I wouldn't ask if it weren't urgent. I swear to you, this is temporary, just a few months until Mark stabilizes, then we're done." I looked at him carefully. I wanted to believe him. He seemed almost broken, his voice trembling at the edges. I thought of Emily standing beside him all these years, supporting him, and of Sophie, who deserved stability. I finally nodded. "I'll do it. But this is temporary, a few months, no more." Relief washed over his face. He clasped my hand like he had just been rescued. "Thank you, Michael. You don't know what this means." The following week, we set up the arrangement. Every month I would transfer $1,250 to Daniel's account, and he would add his share before sending it to Mark. It felt formal enough to keep track of, and I trusted him to handle it from there. At first, I tried not to think too much about it. Life went on. My work kept me busy with a bridge project near the Ohio River, long days at the site and late nights reviewing designs. Still, each time I sent that money, a small knot tightened in my stomach. I brushed it off, convincing myself I was helping my family. One evening in July, Emily stopped by my place with Sophie. We sat on the porch while Sophie played with chalk on the driveway. Emily looked tired, her hair pulled back, her hands restless on her lap. "Michael, thank you for helping. I know Daniel hasn't told you how much it means, but I want you to know I appreciate it." She hesitated, then added, "He says things will get better soon." I smiled gently, though inside I wondered how long soon really meant. I didn't want to worry her, so I just said, "Anything for you and Sophie." That night, as I watched my niece draw colorful shapes under the dim porch light, I told myself I had done the right thing. Family was family, and sometimes you had to sacrifice for them. But there were moments that unsettled me. A new watch gleaming on Daniel's wrist one Sunday at a family barbecue. The way he brushed off questions about work, changing the subject too quickly. Emily's quiet glance at me when he wasn't looking. Little things small enough to ignore if I wanted to, but together they whispered that something was not quite right. By the end of the summer, I had sent several payments. Each transfer felt heavier than the last, not because of the money itself, but because of the silence that followed. Mark never called to say thank you. Paul was never mentioned again. And Daniel, instead of showing gratitude, seemed more distant, more distracted. One evening in September, as I was driving home across the Brent Spence Bridge, I thought about the promise Daniel had made, that this would only last a few months. I tightened my grip on the wheel, a thought pressing at the back of my mind that I tried to push away. I told myself I was doing the right thing. I told myself this was for Emily and Sophie, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stepped into something I didn't fully understand. Something that would demand more than I had bargained for. I just didn't know yet how much more it would take. The first sign that things were changing came when Emily told me she had canceled Sophie's art class. She tried to say it lightly over the phone on a Wednesday night, like it was no big deal. I could hear Sophie in the background asking when she could go back, her small voice breaking my heart. Emily spoke quickly, saying they just needed to cut back for a little while. I didn't argue, not then. But after we hung up, I sat there staring at the darkened living room, thinking about an 8-year-old girl who loved drawing animals and flowers, now left with a box of dull crayons at the kitchen table. A few weeks later, Emily stopped by my place on her way home from school. She carried a paper bag with leftover cafeteria sandwiches, which she set on my counter. She laughed when I asked about it, saying she had figured out a way to save on groceries. I watched her as she unwrapped one of the sandwiches, the kind students didn't take at lunch, and started eating it like it was perfectly normal. "Emily, what are you doing?" I asked, my chest tightening. She shrugged. "It's fine. Food is food. If I eat these, then we can stretch the grocery money further." I wanted to tell her to stop, that I could help more, but she shook her head before I could get the words out. "No, Michael. You've already done enough. I just need to make smarter choices." Her smile was forced, her eyes dull. That was the first time I truly understood the weight she was carrying, how far she was willing to bend for her family, even if it meant breaking herself piece by piece. One Saturday, I picked Sophie up for ice cream. She sat in the passenger seat, her legs swinging, her face lit with excitement at the cone I handed her. Halfway through, she said, "Mommy says we can't go to the movies anymore. She says it's too expensive." I glanced at her, my heart sinking. Sophie licked her ice cream, then added, "Daddy said we all have to be strong for Uncle Mark." I gripped the steering wheel tighter. How could a child be made to carry that kind of explanation? I told her gently that none of it was her fault, that she deserved to have fun. She nodded, but I could see she didn't believe me. The next week, Emily came by again, this time without Sophie. She looked thinner, her clothes hanging loose. She told me she had given up her gym membership, stopped buying new clothes, and was even spacing out her doctor visits. I stared at her. Emily, you can't keep cutting yourself down like this. What happens if you get sick? She pressed her lips together, avoiding my eyes. We'll manage. We always manage. Her words echoed in my mind long after she left. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about the way she was shrinking herself, erasing her needs, convincing herself that sacrifice was the same as strength. One evening in October, I stopped by their house to drop off some documents she needed for school. As I walked in, I heard Sophie in the living room asking her mom if she could have new markers for her birthday. Emily hesitated before answering, then promised maybe next time. Sophie's shoulders slumped and she went back to drawing with the half-dried ones she had. Daniel came in from the garage at that moment, tossing his keys on the counter. He glanced at me, then at Emily, then muttered something about dinner not being ready yet. His tone was sharp, impatient, like she had failed some unspoken test. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to say something. Emily shot me a look, silently asking me not to. I swallowed my words and sat there, the room heavy with unspoken tension. Later that night, after Sophie was in bed, Emily pulled me aside. Don't make it worse, Michael. Please. I'm doing everything I can to keep the peace. Her voice cracked on the last word. I hugged her, feeling how fragile she had become. I promised her I would stand by her even if she thought she had to fight this alone. Driving home, I thought about all the little things she had given up. An art class, a movie night, a fresh meal, a doctor's visit. Each sacrifice chipped away at her until there was barely anything left but duty, and for what? For a man who accused her of betrayal over a $40 shirt, for a family debt that no one but Daniel seemed to control. I realized then that this wasn't just a matter of finances. It was a slow erosion of her spirit, a quiet unraveling that left scars no one else could see, and I could no longer pretend it was just her problem to solve. The night Emily invited me for dinner, I sensed the tension before I even walked through the door. The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, but beneath it there was a silence that clung to the walls. Sophie ran up to greet me, her arms wrapping around my waist, her smile the only light in the room. Emily emerged from the kitchen with a tired smut, her hair tied back, her hands red from chopping vegetables. Daniel sat at the table, already scrolling through his phone, barely looking up when I came in. We sat down together, plates filled, and for a brief moment it felt almost normal. Sophie chatted about school, telling us how her class was learning about the solar system. Her little hands moved excitedly as she described Saturn's rings. Emily laughed softly, her eyes warming as she watched her daughter talk. I let myself believe we might get through one peaceful evening. But Daniel set his fork down, his gaze narrowing on Emily's blouse. It was the same one from before, the $40 blouse that had started so much trouble. He cleared his throat. So you decided to wear that again? Showing it off, are you? Emily's hand froze halfway to her mouth. I could see the color drain from her face. She set her fork down carefully and answered, her voice calm but strained. Daniel, I told you I bought this with money I earned tutoring after school. It didn't come from our account. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his lips curling into a cold smile. Tutoring money. Right. Or maybe you just needed an excuse to dress up for someone at work. The words hit like a slap. I felt the heat rising in my chest, but Emily spoke first. That's not fair. I do my job, I take care of this family, and I used my own money for one shirt, just one. Daniel's eyes darkened. You think it's just about the shirt. It's about priorities, Emily. While my brother is drowning, you're out buying clothes to impress other people. Sophie's fork clattered against her plate. Her wide eyes darted between her parents' confusion and fear etched across her face. I slammed my hand on the table before I even realized I had moved. That's enough, Daniel. She bought a blouse, $40, and you're making it sound like she drained a bank account. Do you hear yourself? Daniel turned on me, his jaw tight. Stay out of it, Michael. This is between my wife and me. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. Not when you humiliate her in front of her daughter. Not when you twist everything she does into an accusation. Emily's eyes welled with tears. Please, both of you, stop. She reached for Sophie, but the girl had already started crying, her small body trembling as she pushed her chair back. She bolted down the hall, her sobs echoing in the house. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Sophie's door slamming shut. Emily covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking. Daniel looked away, muttering under his breath. This family is falling apart because nobody knows how to put it first. I stared at him, my fists clenched. You think accusing Emily of cheating is putting the family first? You think tearing her down over a blouse makes you a provider, a husband, a father? His face hardened, but he said nothing. The only sound was Emily's quiet sobs. I stood, pushing my chair back. I had no appetite left. I walked into the hallway, gently knocking on Sophie's door. She opened it a crack, her eyes red and swollen. I crouched down, trying to smile for her sake. Hey, kiddo. You okay? She shook her head, whispering, Why is Daddy so mad at Mommy? My throat tightened. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. Sometimes grown-ups forget how to talk to each other. But none of this is your fault, okay? You didn't do anything wrong. She nodded slowly, though I could see the fear still in her eyes. I hugged her before sending her back inside, promising we'd talk again soon. When I returned to the dining room, Emily was clearing plates with shaking hands. Daniel had retreated to the living room, the glow of the television reflecting off his blank face. I helped Emily gather the dishes, lowering my voice so he couldn't hear. You don't deserve this, Em. You've done everything to hold this family together, and he treats you like you're the problem. She whispered back, her voice breaking. Please, Michael, don't make it worse. I just need things to stay calm for Sophie. I nodded, but inside I felt the ground shifting again. This wasn't just a rough patch or a difference of opinion. It was poison seeping into every corner of their home. I left shortly after the cool night air hitting me as I stepped outside. I sat in my car for a long moment before starting the engine, staring back at the small house where my sister was slowly being broken down. That dinner had shown me more than I wanted to see. It wasn't only about money or arguments anymore. It was about respect, trust, and the absence of both. And it was about a child caught in the crossfire, learning fear where she should have learned love. In the weeks that followed that dinner, I started watching Daniel more closely. It wasn't something I planned, more like an instinct that sharpened each time I saw him. I noticed the way he avoided eye contact when money came up, the way his answers about work grew shorter, clipped, as if he was hiding more than he was sharing. One Friday night, I dropped by to bring Emily some supplies for her classroom. Daniel wasn't home yet. She said he was working late again, another client meeting downtown. When he finally walked through the door an hour later, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled. There was something in his pocket that caught my eye. A thick roll of bills quickly shoved out of sight before Emily could notice. I drove home unsettled, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than usual. I told myself maybe it was a bonus, maybe he had picked up cash for some legitimate reason, but the thought didn't stick. Daniel wasn't the kind of man to carry around that much cash, not unless there was something he didn't want others to see. The next week at a family cookout at my parents' house, he showed up with a new watch gleaming on his wrist. It was subtle, nothing flashy, but I had a good eye. That watch wasn't cheap. Emily said nothing, only glanced at it once before looking away. I wondered if she had dared to ask him about it. It was then I realized I needed answers I couldn't get on my own. That night, I called Detective Harris, an old friend of my father's who had worked in financial crimes for years. He had helped me once before on a project at work tracing stolen equipment payments. I trusted him, and more importantly, I trusted his judgment. We met at a small diner near the river. Harris listened quietly as I laid everything out, from Daniel's plea for money to the arguments over the blouse to the roll of cash I had seen. He stirred his coffee slowly, then nodded. "I can run a check, see what I can find. It may take time, but if something is off, it'll leave a trail." A week later, he called me back. His voice was low, deliberate. "Michael." I looked into the accounts. The money isn't going where Daniel said it was. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of a construction site, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" He explained that the transfers I had been making to Daniel were being withdrawn in cash, sometimes the very same day. Other times the funds were funneled through a Venmo account under a name that wasn't his. The nickname was vague, but Harris confirmed the phone number linked back to Daniel. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, anger and disbelief swirling inside me. All those months I thought I was helping Mark, helping family. I had been feeding Daniel's secret. Harris hesitated before adding, "This doesn't prove exactly where the money is going, but it proves it isn't going to his brother." I thanked him, my voice tight, and promised to keep it quiet until we knew more. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment in my mind, every time Daniel had looked me in the eye and sworn this was about family, about saving Mark's garage. I thought about Emily eating cafeteria leftovers, Sophie giving up her art class, and me transferring hard-earned money into an account that was nothing more than a lie. The next weekend I went to visit Emily. I watched her pack Sophie's lunch with care, cutting the sandwich into small triangles, tucking an apple into the bag. She looked thinner, the shadows under her eyes deeper. Daniel was upstairs getting ready to leave for another late-night meeting. I asked Emily quietly, "Do you know where he really goes?" She shook her head. "He says he's working. He always says he's working." I didn't push further. I didn't want to burden her until I had proof, but my stomach churned as I watched her paste on a smile when Sophie skipped into the kitchen. Later, as I drove home, Harris's words echoed in my head. The money isn't going where Daniel said it was. I gripped the steering wheel and made myself a promise. I would find out exactly where it was going, and when I did, I would no longer stay silent. The next morning, I drove across town to the west side of Cincinnati, where Mark's garage sat between a laundromat and an old diner. The air smelled of oil and rubber as I pulled into the lot. Cars were lined up, some with hoods open, mechanics moving between them. Mark was under the hood of a Chevy, his hands greasy, a rag tucked in his back pocket. When he saw me, he smiled, surprised. "Michael, long time no see. What brings you here?" I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "I need to talk to you. Privately." He wiped his hands on the rag and led me into the office, a small room with cracked vinyl chairs and a calendar from last year still hanging on the wall. He offered me a seat, then leaned against the desk, folding his arms. "What's up?" I studied his face for a moment, looking for any sign that he knew why I was there. Finally, I asked Mark, "Have you been getting money from Daniel and me?" About 2,500 a month. His brow furrowed. He laughed lightly like he thought I was joking. What are you talking about? I kept my eyes on him. Daniel told me you were in debt because of Paul. He said you needed help, that creditors were after you, that you'd lose the garage without it. He told me you needed 2,500 a month. I've been sending him my half, believing he was sending it to you. The smile faded from Mark's face. He looked genuinely confused. Michael, I never asked Daniel for a dime. Paul did get into trouble, yeah, but that was his mess, not mine. I didn't co-sign anything. Why would I need money from Daniel? My chest tightened. I leaned forward. Are you telling me you never needed help? He shook his head firmly. Never. The garage is fine. I mean, it's tough running a small business, but I'm paying my bills. Nobody is coming after me. I pulled out my phone, hit record, and set it on the desk. I didn't want there to be any question later. Mark didn't even flinch, too caught up in the shock of what I was saying. He rubbed his temples. Let me tell you something, Michael. A couple of months ago, Daniel came by. He asked me if he could use my name for something. He said it was harmless, just paperwork. I didn't think much of it, but now I wonder. My stomach dropped. What kind of paperwork? He sighed. I didn't see all of it. He had some forms, said he needed a name attached to a secondary account for business reasons. I told him no, but he pressed, said it wouldn't matter. Finally, just to get him off my back, I let him use my ID for a quick check. He swore it wouldn't affect me. I stared at him, my pulse pounding. So you're saying he might have used your name to open an account? Mark nodded slowly, realization dawning in his eyes. That must be what he did. I thought it was weird, but he's my brother. I didn't think he'd actually use it for something shady. I ended the recording and pocketed my phone. The pieces were falling into place, and they painted a picture worse than I imagined. Daniel hadn't just lied about Mark's debt. He had used his own brother's name as cover for whatever he was doing with the money. I stood, the weight of anger pressing down on me. Thank you, Mark. This changes everything. He looked worried. Michael, what's going on? What is Daniel doing? I met his eyes. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. As I left the garage, the sun was setting behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the lot. I got into my truck and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Emily's sacrifices, Sophie's confusion, my own money funneled into lies. All of it came back to Daniel. For the first time, I had proof. Not suspicion, not vague unease, but real evidence that Daniel had spun a web of lies. And I knew this was only the beginning of what I was about to uncover. Detective Harris called me one rainy afternoon while I was at the construction site. The sky was gray, the air heavy with the smell of wet concrete, and his voice on the line matched the weight of the day. Michael, I found something, and you're not going to like it. We met later that evening at a small coffee shop near downtown. Harris slid a manila folder across the table, his eyes serious. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and receipts. I pulled them out one by one, my hands trembling slightly as the pieces fell into place. The first photo showed Daniel at a high-end restaurant on Vine Street, leaning across the table laughing with a woman who was definitely not Emily. She was younger, stylish, her dark hair falling over her shoulders, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. My stomach twisted. Who is she? Harris sipped his coffee before answering. Her name is Vanessa Cole, 29 years old, works in public relations at a firm in Over the Rhine. She and Daniel have been meeting regularly for months. I stared at the next set of photos, each one worse than the last. Daniel holding open the door to a hotel downtown, Vanessa stepping in beside him. Daniel carrying shopping bags from luxury boutiques, Vanessa smiling at his side. Then came the receipts. Expensive dinners, hotel stays, jewelry. Thousands of dollars in charges that lined up perfectly with the money I had been sending him. I clenched my fists until my knuckles ached. Emily was eating cafeteria leftovers while Sophie gave up her art classes, and this was where the money had gone. Not to Mark, not to family, but to a secret life built on betrayal. Harris watched me carefully. I know this isn't easy to see, but now you have proof. He paused, lowering his voice. This isn't just financial betrayal. It's personal. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. I gathered the papers back into the folder, each one feeling heavier than the last. That night I drove through the rain-soaked streets, the windshield wipers beating in rhythm with my thoughts. I imagined Emily's face if she saw those photos, if she knew that while she was cutting costs to keep their home afloat, Daniel was spending thousands to wine and dine another woman. I parked outside my house and sat in the silence, the rain tapping against the roof. Rage burned in me, but so did a cold determination. I couldn't rush this. Emily deserved the truth, but she also deserved to have it laid out in a way that left no room for denial. The following weekend, I visited my parents. My mother Rachel was in the kitchen baking, the smell of cinnamon filling the air, while my father Thomas sat at the table reading the paper. They asked me about work, about the bridge project, but I could barely focus. The folder sat heavy in my bag, a secret I couldn't yet share. Later, when my father caught me alone on the porch, he gave me a long look. "You've got something on your mind, son." I hesitated, then shook my head. "Not yet, Dad. Not until I know everything." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Just remember, truth has a way of cutting through lies, but timing matters." I carried those words with me as I drove home. Timing mattered. I had the evidence of Daniel's betrayal, but I needed to know the full scope before I brought it into the light. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and restless thoughts. I kept the folder hidden in my desk, opening it when I needed to remind myself of what was real. Each time I looked at Vanessa's smiling face beside Daniel's, I felt the anger sharpen, but I also felt the weight of responsibility. Emily's world would shatter when she saw this. I had to be ready to catch the pieces. One evening I drove past the hotel where several of the receipts had come from. The glowing sign cast a cold light on the wet pavement, and I could almost see them walking inside together. I gripped the steering wheel, promising myself that Daniel's secrets would not stay hidden forever. For now, I kept quiet. Emily still thought she was sacrificing for Mark, for family. Sophie still believed her parents were just stressed. I carried the truth alone, waiting for the moment when revealing it would finally tear away the mask Daniel had worn for too long. It was early November when my parents asked all of us to come over for dinner. The air was crisp, leaves scattered across their front yard. The kind of evening that usually felt comforting and familiar. But as I pulled into the driveway, I knew this gathering would be different. My stomach was already tight with dread. Inside, Rachel was bustling in the kitchen, the smell of pot roast and mashed potatoes drifting through the house. She greeted me with a warm hug, but I could feel the tension in her grip. Thomas sat at the table, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the headlines of the local paper without really reading them. Emily was already there with Sophie, who clung to her mother's side. Daniel walked in a few minutes later, carrying himself with an air of forced confidence. Dinner began quietly. Forks scraped against plates, small talk stumbled along. Rachel asked Sophie about school, and Sophie brightened as she talked about her latest book report. For a few minutes, it almost felt normal. Then Thomas set his fork down with a deliberate thud. He looked directly at Daniel. "I hear you've been asking Michael for money to help Mark." The room fell silent. Daniel nodded slowly. That's right. Mark's been struggling. I've been doing everything I can, but Emily's spending habits make it harder to keep up. Emily's head snapped up. Her eyes widened in disbelief. Spending habits. I haven't bought anything for myself in months. I gave up my gym membership, I packed cafeteria leftovers for lunch, and Sophie had to stop her art classes. Daniel shrugged, his voice calm but cold. There's always something. New clothes, little extras here and there. It adds up. I felt the heat rise in my chest. He was twisting the truth, painting Emily as careless when I had watched her sacrifice everything. Before I could speak, Rachel cut in gently. Maybe we all just need to take a breath. It's been a stressful time. We should support each other, not tear each other down. Thomas's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. No, this isn't just stress. This is about responsibility and loyalty. A man who blames his wife for problems he created is no man at all. Daniel bristled. I'm the one keeping this family afloat. If I didn't step in for Mark, if I didn't handle the bills, we'd be in even worse shape. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Don't you dare talk to me about keeping this family afloat. I raised my children to be honest, to take responsibility for their choices. If you think you can cover your failures by blaming Emily, you're mistaken. Rachel reached for his arm, her voice trembling. Thomas, please. Yelling won't solve this. We need to find a way to keep the peace. He pulled his arm back, his face hard. Peace without truth is just silence. And I won't sit at this table pretending everything is fine while lies poison this family. The room crackled with tension. Emily sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, while Sophie leaned against her, eyes wide and confused. Daniel's jaw clenched, his face red with anger. Rachel's eyes filled with tears as she looked between her husband and her son-in-law. I broke the silence, my voice steady but firm. Emily has done nothing but sacrifice. I've seen it with my own eyes. Don't put this on her, Daniel. Daniel shot me a glare. You think you know everything, but you don't. You've always been waiting for me to fail. Thomas's fist hit the table, rattling the silverware. Enough. A man who betrays his family doesn't get to play the victim. Rachel stood quickly, her hands shaking. Stop it, both of you. You're tearing this family apart, but the damage was already done. For the first time, my parents stood on opposite sides of an argument. My father's unyielding stance against betrayal clashed with my mother's desperate plea for harmony. Emily sat in the middle of it all, silent tears sliding down her face while Daniel refused to back down. The dinner ended in fragments. Plates half-eaten, chairs pushed back abruptly. Daniel left first, muttering under his breath. Emily gathered Sophie and slipped out quietly. Rachel stayed in the kitchen, wiping at her eyes as she cleaned dishes that no one had touched. Thomas walked out to the porch, lighting a cigarette, even though he hadn't smoked in years. I stood there in the wreckage of what should have been a family meal, realizing that Daniel's lies had done more than hurt Emily. They had split us open, turned us against each other. And I knew this was only the beginning of the divide he would cause. A few weeks after that disastrous dinner, my phone rang late on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garage sorting tools when I saw Emily's name. Her voice was shaky, almost unrecognizable. Michael, I found something. I set the wrench down and wiped my hands, my chest tightening. What is it? She was crying, her words tumbling out in broken pieces. I was cleaning up the laptop in the office, trying to clear space for Sophie's school projects. I opened the email, and there it was. Dozens of messages. Daniel and some woman named Vanessa. The name hit me like a stone. I had seen her face in the photos Harris gave me, but hearing it come from Emily's lips was different. It was no longer a secret I carried alone. Emily's voice cracked. He called her beautiful. He told her he couldn't wait to see her again. There were dinner plans, hotel confirmations. Michael, he even promised her jewelry. I pressed my hand to my forehead, trying to steady my own anger before it bled into my voice. Emily, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Do you hear me? Her sobs grew louder. How could I be so blind? All those nights he said he was working late. All the times he made me feel guilty for spending $1 on myself. And the whole time he was with her. I wished I could be there instantly to take the weight off her shoulders, to shield her from the sharp edge of betrayal. Instead, I sat in the garage with my heart pounding, listening to the pieces of her world collapse through the phone. I told her I was coming over. She begged me not to, said Sophie was upstairs doing homework, and she didn't want her to see her like this. Just talk to me, Michael. Please. So I listened as she poured out every detail. She described scrolling through the messages, her hands shaking, her stomach churning. She said she read until the words blurred, until she felt sick. The emails went back months, maybe longer. He had told Vanessa things he hadn't told Emily in years. She whispered, I don't even recognize my husband anymore. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tighter. Emily, you need to know this has nothing to do with you not being enough. He chose this. He chose to lie. She sniffled, her voice steadier now. I can't keep living like this. For Sophie, for myself, I have to get out. Hearing those words, I felt a strange mix of pain and relief. Pain that my sister had been pushed so far, relief that she finally saw what I had known for weeks. That night I barely slept. I kept seeing Emily hunched over the laptop, the glow of the screen reflecting in her tear-filled eyes, the words of betrayal cutting deeper than any blade. The next morning I drove by her house, though she hadn't asked me to. I parked across the street and watched from my truck. Sophie ran out to play in the yard, her laughter rising into the crisp air. Emily came out behind her, her face pale, her smile forced. She kept glancing at the front door as if waiting for Daniel to walk through. When he finally did, carrying his briefcase and acting like nothing had changed, I saw Emily's body stiffen. She didn't say anything, but the distance between them was unmistakable. I knew then that the truth had taken root. Emily would never look at him the same way again. And no matter how much Daniel tried to control the narrative, no matter how many excuses he spun, she had seen what could never be unseen. That was the day my sister stopped being blind to who he really was. And it was the day I realized the time was coming soon when silence would no longer protect her. A few days after Emily's discovery, my phone buzzed with a call from Detective Harris. His tone was clipped professional, but there was an edge that told me he had uncovered something new. Michael, we need to talk. We met again at that diner by the river, the same booth where he had first shown me the folder of photographs and receipts. Harris slid another envelope across the table. This one was thicker, filled with spreadsheets, company emails, and notes from a source inside Midwest Analytics. He leaned in. Daniel's not just cheating on his wife. He's been cheating his company too. I opened the folder and scanned the documents. At first, the numbers blurred together, but then I started to see the pattern. Commission statements that didn't line up with sales, client accounts mysteriously reassigned, irregular bonuses funneled through shell entries. Harris explained quietly, Daniel's been skimming. Diverting client payments, taking credit for accounts that weren't his. Worse, he's been accessing sensitive client data without authorization. That's a federal issue if the company decides to pursue it. My stomach twisted as I read line after line. It wasn't just betrayal in his marriage anymore. It was fraud, deception crimes that could take down his career and drag Emily's family name through the mud if it all came out the wrong way. Harris sat back, his eyes narrowing. The internal audit team at Midwest Analytics has already flagged irregularities. They're launching an investigation. It's only a matter of time before Daniel is caught. I closed the folder slowly, my hands tight around the paper. Sooner or later, Daniel's mask would slip in front of more than just us. He was about to be exposed not only as a liar at home, but as a criminal in his career. On the drive back, I thought about Emily and Sophie, about how Daniel had controlled the story for so long, making Emily feel guilty for spending $40 while he spent thousands behind her back. Now, with the company digging into his records, his lies were about to collapse on all sides. That evening, Emily called me. Her voice was hollow, drained. Daniel came home acting like nothing happened. He kissed Sophie goodnight, asked me how my day was, like he hadn't been sneaking around for months. I don't understand how he can pretend so easily. I wanted to tell her about the company investigation, but I held back. Not yet. The timing had to be right. Harris's words echoed in my head. Timing matters. Instead, I told her gently, Emily, when the truth comes, it won't just be about the emails. There's more you don't know yet, but you will. There was a pause on the line. Her voice cracked. I don't know how much more I can take. I sat there in the dark, gripping the phone. You're stronger than you realize, and when the time comes, you won't have to face it alone. The next week, Harris called again. He told me Midwest Analytics had placed Daniel under quiet review. They hadn't confronted him yet, but they were pulling his records, interviewing clients, tracking every transaction. It was only a matter of weeks before he would be cornered. One night, I drove past the sleek glass building where Daniel worked. I sat in my truck across the street watching employees stream out into the cold evening. I imagined Daniel inside smiling at co-workers, pretending everything was fine while the walls closed in around him. For the first time in months, I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. His lies were finally catching up to him, not because of anything I had done, but because truth has a way of surfacing. Still, I knew I couldn't rely only on the company to bring him down. Emily needed to see the full picture, and Sophie needed protection from the fallout. As I pulled away from the curb, the city lights flashing across my windshield, I realized the stage was being set. Daniel's downfall would not just be in our living room. It would be in the boardrooms and offices of the company he had betrayed. And when it all came crashing down, there would be no hiding who he really was. I was the one who asked my parents to host the meeting. Their house had always been a place where truths were spoken, and I wanted no way for Daniel to escape the weight of what was coming. Rachel agreed, though her voice trembled when she said yes. Thomas simply nodded, his jaw set, his eyes like stone. The evening arrived cold and brittle, the November air pressing against the windows. One by one they gathered in the living room. Emily sat on the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sophie spending the night with a friend so she would not see what was about to happen. Mark stood near the doorway, shifting uneasily, guilt still written across his face for ever letting Daniel use his name. Rachel busied herself with tea she never drank. Thomas stood with his arms crossed, waiting. Daniel came last, late as always, his expression wary. He glanced around the room, sensing the tension, but he forced a smile anyway. What is this, some kind of intervention? I stood near the fireplace, folder in hand, my heart beating hard but steady. Yes, Daniel, that's exactly what this is, he scoffed, trying to sound amused. For what? I opened the folder and pulled out my phone, first setting it on the coffee table. I pressed play. Mark's voice filled the room, clear and undeniable. I never asked Daniel for money. I never needed help. The garage is fine. Daniel's face darkened. That doesn't prove anything. He could be lying. Mark stepped forward, his voice shaking but strong. I'm not lying. You used my name for your own account, and you dragged Michael into your lies. Daniel's mouth opened, but I didn't let him speak. Next, I laid out the photographs. Daniel and Vanessa at restaurants outside hotels, her hand on his arm. Emily gasped, covering her mouth. Tears spilling instantly down her cheeks. Daniel's face flushed red. Those are taken out of context. She's a client. Harris's report came next, pages of financial records showing the Venmo transfers, the cash withdrawals, the misused accounts. I slid them across the table. Do clients usually pay with stolen money, Daniel? He lunged forward, slamming his hand on the papers. You think you're some kind of hero digging through my life? You don't know the pressure I've been under. You don't know what it's like to carry the weight of a family while everyone else sits back. Emily stood suddenly, her voice breaking. Weight of a family? I gave up everything. I starved myself. I cut our daughter's joy out of her life, all so you could play house with another woman. Daniel turned on her, his voice sharp. Don't twist this around. You never supported me the way I needed. Thomas stepped forward, his voice low but thundering in the room. Enough. A man who betrays his wife, his child, his family, and his work has no ground left to stand on. Daniel looked at him, eyes blazing. You don't understand, old man. Thomas's hand slammed against the arm of his chair, the sound echoing. Don't you call me that. From this day forward, you are no son of mine. You are no part of this family. Rachel cried softly, her hands shaking as she reached for a tissue. Emily's sobs filled the silence. I pulled out the final piece, the letter from Midwest Analytics confirming their investigation into fraud and data breaches. They know what you've been doing at work, Daniel. This isn't just about your marriage anymore. This is about your freedom. For the first time, Daniel faltered. His face lost color, his shoulders slumping. He looked around the room, realizing every eye was on him, every lie stripped away. Emily wiped her tears, her voice trembling but firm. I'm done, Daniel. I'm filing for divorce. Sophie and I will not live under the same roof with a liar. Daniel reached for her, but she pulled back, her whole body recoiling. He looked at me then, fury blazing. You did this. I met his glare steadily. No, Daniel. You did this to yourself. The room was silent except for the sound of Emily's crying. Thomas stood tall. Rachel sobbed quietly. Mark looked away in shame. Daniel sat down heavily, his head in his hands, the weight of his ruined life pressing down on him. I knew in that moment the confrontation was over. The truth had been laid bare. There was nothing left for him to hide behind. The weeks that followed moved quickly. Midwest Analytics completed their investigation, and Daniel was called into a closed-door meeting with senior management. By the end of the day, he was escorted out of the building with a box of his belongings in his arms. Word spread fast that he had been caught manipulating client accounts and skimming commissions. His reputation, once carefully crafted, collapsed overnight. Emily met with Laura Bennett, a young but sharp attorney who specialized in family law. Laura listened carefully, took notes, and assured Emily she had more than enough grounds to file for divorce and secure custody of Sophie. I sat beside my sister in that office, watching the weight lift from her shoulders as someone finally told her she had rights, that she had the power to walk away. When the papers were served, Daniel's reaction was explosive. He tried to shout, to plead, to threaten, but Emily held her ground. Laura's calm presence was like a shield, steadying her through every step. For the first time, Emily looked at him without fear. Sophie sensed the changes too. She no longer hid in her room when voices were raised. She began drawing again, filling pages with bright colors and stories only a child could imagine. Emily hung her pictures on the fridge, each one a symbol of the peace slowly returning to their lives. Vanessa vanished as quickly as she had appeared. Once Daniel lost his job and his access to money, she stopped answering his calls. Harris told me he had seen her with someone else downtown already moving on. Daniel was left with nothing but his debts and the echo of his own choices. One evening, Emily invited me over for dinner. The table was simple pasta and garlic bread, but the atmosphere was different. Sophie laughed freely, showing me a drawing of our family, and Emily smiled in a way I hadn't seen in months. There was still pain in her eyes, scars that would take time to heal, but she was standing again. As I watched them, I thought back to the first night she had called me crying over a $40 blouse. That moment had felt like the start of something unraveling, and I had been right. But what I hadn't known was that it would also be the beginning of her freedom, the start of a new chapter for her and Sophie. Daniel had pleaded for money to save his brother, but it had all been a lie. He had betrayed his wife, his daughter, his family, his company, and himself. And in the end, every secret he tried to bury came back to destroy him. I looked at Emily across the table and felt a quiet satisfaction settle in my chest. My brother-in-law begged for help, but what he really wanted was cover for his betrayal. I made sure he paid the price. Do you believe that in the end, a betrayer always pays for what they have done? Share your story with me. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one.